Lionel, is that you?
There, I think I got it.
Dave?
Lionel.
Dave, are you nervous?
No.
I am.
It's okay to be nervous sometimes, and I'm nervous on a regular basis, I would say, but right now I don't feel nervous.
Well, we're putting this on. This is on the free channel. This is the first time Uncle Dave's Fireside Chat has ever been on the free channel.
Whoa. So all right, well, that's big news.
And then you're talking to a much wider audience. That's
true. Well, hello, everyone out there on the great AML Nation free channel.
Yeah, there's this
is Dave Abelese, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's thousands and thousands of people. This is Dave Abelese. That's right, Uncle Dave Abelese that you hear us talk about. This is Uncle Dave Abelese, the guy that wrote what's the book called? Signals and something or others?
Yep, Guide to Signals and Interlockings by Kalmbach Media. Handful of articles, and yeah.
And things are
rolling along.
You've appeared in numerous Rapido videos.
Rapido videos, yep, and of course the Facebook Live trackside on the Onondaga Cutoff, that whole series, which is
very popular.
Hit sort of a grand slam, I guess, in the pandemic, and since then has slowed down because all of us are doing a million things. But we'll get to a few more of those this coming fall, and I'm looking forward to that.
I was driving past a golf course today that I've seen in a town, 30, 40 miles north of where I am. And it's a resort town. It's a very famous resort town in that what's called the Muskokas. And I mean, the Muskokas are this famous cottage country, not unlike the Finger Lakes district, only with much rougher terrain and much more dramatic terrain. And it's a cottage area. But cottages are, like Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell had a cottage there. Martin Short has a cottage there. Many, many professional athletes, many actors. It's that kind of an area.
Neat.
And, I mean, if you were lucky enough that your parents in 1952 decided to buy a cottage on Lake or build a cottage on Lake Muskoka, your wooden cottage that they built, 70 years ago is now worth $2.3 million,
Oh, man.
It's bizarre. But anyway,
that'll do it. Yeah.
But anyways, today I was driving through this town, and the golf course that has been there for decades, as long as I can remember, it's gone. It's overgrown. And I was only past it like maybe 3 years ago, and it's gone. And I don't know what maybe brought just what we were talking about, how things change and stuff. And it's like, man, things are changing a lot in this world.
A lot and quickly. And
yeah.
That has the capability of making even the most confident people feel a little insecure, feel a little nervous. Yeah. Because, you hear a lot more about the negative stuff than you do the positive. And that's a lot. It's a lot to process on an ongoing basis.
And the thing of it is, it's like, it wasn't that many years ago that we wouldn't be saying, oh yeah, it's Uncle Dave Abelese from the Rapido videos, the book he wrote, the Kalmbach videos, stuff in, Railroad Model Craftsman, stuff in Model Railroader, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that it wouldn't be that extensive. And now there are so many avenues for you to, and the Facebook Lives, there's so many avenues for you to ply your trade, so to speak, in the world of model railroading that, things have changed so much in such a short period of time.
It's rapid fire, it's rapid fire. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of it. I think you've touched on that. If it's been one time, it's been 100 times on the podcast. Talking to Eric White or Otto Von Drack or, name your player, Tony Custer. You've got a list of people in the hobby that you've talked to, important people in the hobby that we've talked to. And I think all of them can agree that the change has been constant. I think the sense is that it's accelerating. But at the same time, I think the hobby's never been better as a hobby. It's truly an incredible time to be model railroading. It really is.
And for me, the crazy part is, we've had this discussion before. I can remember having a discussion with Henry Freeman 25 years ago, and we talked at length about how it was the golden age of model railroading. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, we were convinced then it was the golden age of model railroading. And look where we've come in the last, and that was back when we were still dealing with Atlas yellow box Cato locomotives where you had to, put your own grab irons on and stuff like that. And now look at where we are. I can't even imagine what this hobby is going to be like 25 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good statement. There's just no way to tell. I mean, there's a good chance that there's going to be more people involved in the hobby than the prototype by then. the way these prototypes are trying to automate everything and remote control things and everything they're trying to do, there's certainly a frustration there, as myself as a rail fan and as a railroader, to watch these big companies try and do it with less people all the time. I mean, to me, people are central in railroading. And one of the cool parts about model railroading, especially as we, embark on these, railway prototype modelers meets, the RPMs, the train shows, the Springfields, the railfan trips, the railfan weekends, the operations in the hobby, which to me is up and coming, at a very quick rate. That's more and more about people. So it's sort of an interesting juxtaposition right now, I think, between the hobby and the passion for the hobby and the industry and professionals in the industry. I don't think the walls between those two things have ever been lower. Not in my career, anyway.
Yeah, it seems like everybody and his brother can get into manufacturing.
Yeah, manufacturing New Jersey Transit, where I work, is hiring left and right with conductors and engineer trainees and laborers and machinists. They're really working hard to re-equip the workforce, for the next generation or two, which is an exciting opportunity.
So did they lose a lot? Did New Jersey Transit lose a lot of people or something? Like, why would they be hiring so many people?
Well, we had lost a lot of people over the last year, or last decade, I should say, as people just retired. Railroading is not a constant hiring stream. It kind of ebbs and flows. And, a long time ago, I think one of my first podcasts, I think we touched on NJ Transit and how I was the oldest of the younger crowd that had been hired out. When I hired out, I was one of just a couple that year. And in the years to follow, they hired a bunch more people. So I ended up being, a couple of years older than a bunch of people that were of similar age. And things died down for a while then again, for about 8 years. And now the current regime is re-upping again and hiring a bunch more conductors and engineers and trying to promote new people into management, which is more difficult now than it used to be with all the stuff you have to deal with and changes to the retirement plan and pension and things like that. It's definitely a different equation than when I hired out, and that's being reflected in who's willing to take those chances. But at the same time, you still see that ebb and flow. And right now is a great time to hire at NJ Transit. And a lot of the big class ones, and this, George Taylor and others that we talk to regularly about that they also ebb and flow, and they're realizing they probably cut too far. So some of them are starting to hire again. And so, it comes and goes around. But in the hobby of model railroading, I don't think I think the barriers to entry there are lower than they ever have been too.
Sure. And yet right now at this time, and I mean, this is August of 2023, I mean, manufacturers and retailers are having a meltdown because the products aren't selling. And me personally, I think it's just the ebb and flow of the hobby. But
I would agree with that.
But for some reason or other, retailers and manufacturers just have this overload of material. I guess they thought the pandemic or the great times of the pandemic were going to carry on forever or something.
Well, it's an interesting change. We've talked to Jason Schron, the official sponsor of this channel on the Mother's Life Network.
Oh, yeah. Hang on before we go on. Because this is on the free channel, We gotta talk about our sponsor.
Yes, Rapido Trains.
Yeah, your fast track to model railroading fun.
Rapido Trains, your fast track to model railroading fun.
Right there at rapidotrains.com. One of the cutting edge manufacturers. That was very well done, by the way. That was, Bruce does a wonderful job with that, but when the evil overlord does it, it's pretty exciting too.
Well, because you did the first part.
Well, right.
And remember
play the game, right?
Remember to do it again in about 5 minutes, because we got to play the jingles at least 3 or 4 times before the program's over.
All right. Well, we'll see if I don't screw it up the second time. Life goes like that sometimes. Oh, I did it great the first time. I'll be great at it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's
But Rapido's cutting edge. They're pushing an envelope here, and they're staying focused on their core mission. But Rapido and Scale Trains and Spring Mills Depot and Exact Rail, which is now part of Scale Trains, a lot of these manufacturers are doing the pre-order model now for the retail side of things. So the challenge with that is that there's only so many products you make for every run, because you're basing it on a pre-order number, right? And I'm sure there's some play built into that for the manufacturers. But I think what's curious is that, when Athearn Blue Box used to come out with a new GP38, right? It was the same body, but was different paint jobs. So they would run that model for 10 years, 20 years. Every couple of years, they do a run and they do new paint jobs, and they release the new paint jobs, but then they were able to carry it on because there was no social media. You saw the ads in the magazines, right? Or you saw it at the hobby shop. Maybe a friend's layout. So the shock value lasted longer. It carried more energy further. Whereas Facebook and Instagram, it's what have you done for me in the last hour? Because that's the only thing that sticks on your page. Everything else just disappears.
That's the thing.
quickly.
When you said Spring Mills Depot, I opened up their page as we're talking. And one of the things that gets to me constantly, and I understand that everybody's that's part of what's the problem now. Everybody is just completely overwhelmed. You go to Spring Mills Depot and it's a great website, blah, blah, blah. But you scroll down below their containers and their Baltimore and Ohio, and there's got a couple of announcements, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, we'll be attending the Great Scale Train Show in Timonium in October 15th and 16th of 2022. We'll be attending Amherst in January 2023. Timonium. And it's change
That's 8,
it.
9, 10 months ago, right? If you're going to put it up there, you got to keep it up to date.
You got to keep it up to date. That's why I keep the website for the podcast really simple. Because the main page is always up to date, because you can't go to the main page and have it to be you can't do that.
No, it's an important point. I mean, Spring Mills, they're making stuff that nobody else has made, and they're doing it at a very high level. So
absolutely,
if I'm not mistaken, I think it's just 2 guys that are in charge of the thing, and
sure.
they're both fully employed someplace else. So it's definitely a side project for you. But yeah, anytime you see a website anymore that's out of date, your mind goes to another website. That's what happens. That's just the natural play of things.
Or what it does is you wonder, is this company still going? Has they run into some sort of problems? Blah, 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 blah. Because you just said it's only run by 2 guys that have full-time jobs. Well, the podcast you're listening to right now is run by 1 guy that has a business with 12 employees that he runs daily.
Touche. You still got to keep it up to date. Yeah. Hey, I'm agreeing with you. And
I know you are. And I know these guys make spectacular stuff. The reason I brought it up is because we started talking about the manufacturers, and I don't think anybody realizes this hobby is growing like crazy. And right now, the retailers and the manufacturers are having a meltdown because their product isn't selling. And I keep saying to one particular retailer who's become a good friend of mine, I'm like, this is just the ebb and flow of the hobby and business. It's
probably any business too.
Yeah, well, sure.
It's certainly the railroad business, but I would argue it's your business. I would argue it's
absolutely.
You can't ride an up curve forever. At some point, there's going to be ups and downs, and that's just par for the course.
Yeah. Look at yourself. That's, we can lead that discussion right into yourself. 7 years ago, nobody even knew who you were.
That's true. Well, my family did.
Your family, yeah, your brother did.
Although Pete wasn't born yet.
Exactly.
Right? My dad 7.5 years ago, he was still alive.
Yeah.
Like my life was a lot different 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's very true.
And in 7 years is not a long time.
No.
And look how much your life has changed in the hobby in 7 years. It's almost creepy when you start to think about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical adjustment. That's a fact. Good point.
And this is what's happening with the hobby. Like, I just don't think anybody has any idea where we're going. It's like, hang on, it's like you're riding a Bronco. It's like, I hate it when you'll see people say, well, it'll be old guys saying, well, the hobby is dying. It's like, the hobby is like that. We left that dock. We left that ship left that dock years ago. This is a new hobby with new parameters that we're still trying to figure out.
I agree. And I mean, more than I do, certainly have more time to reflect on it over the years than I do at this point. But even for me, so, Model Railroader comes in the mail today. It's the September issue. It's an article I've been looking forward to having in the magazine for a while, and it finally popped out this month. So I'm very excited. It's the upgrade to the tower at CP282, which is one that Eric White had asked me to put together when I was working with Perry Squire to pull that all, to finally finalize that scene there at CP282, which has been one we featured on Facebook Live a bunch of times. It's a fun spot to watch trains. It's a neat scene on the layout. And I was very excited about the article, but right next to my article is an article by a guy named Frank DiStefano. Frank DiStefano is one of the guys that came up to talk to me at Springfield this year with his whole crowd. I call them the BRW guys. It's a bunch of, 20-something young guys, some, and some young women as well. And they go to shows all over the Northeast, and they just stick together and they wander the show as a big group. And I knew Frank. I'd seen him on Facebook a couple of times. He'd liked a bunch of stuff I'd done on Facebook. He had recently been married. He's just one of these guys that's got a lot of good things going on in his life right now. It's his first piece in Model Railroader, and it's about I think it's a 4x6 layout in his New York apartment, modeling a railroad in Flushing on Long Island in 1886. It's incredible, and it's scenic. And there he is, smiling at his, meet Frank DiStefano, and it's like, this guy is 20-something, just got married. He's offered some kind words to the Onondaga Cutoff through the years, and here he is now in Model Railroader, right next to me, in a magazine, with Jerry Diedzik and Tony Custer, and Bernie Kopinski shot the cover shot, and there's Frank's name, and it's the hobby it's not just growing, it's growing quick.
Yes.
This younger generation is embracing it in ways that even my generation never would have thought to embrace it, because we didn't have the access to it that they do now.
Yeah.
I think it's really exciting. Springfield was just an eye-opener. It was not a bunch of retired guys.
It was an eye-opener for you.
Yeah. Oh, man. It blew my socks off. I'm already excited for January. It's going to be fun to do again.
So is Model Railroader still going?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. They're still chugging along.
They're still
discovering still new content, still in paper. Not as big as it used to be. RMC is climbing again with the page count, and their magazine, I'm not sure that it's ever been better. It's beautiful. And that's a bold statement, because it's been a great magazine for a long, long time. But the production is gorgeous, and Otto's having a lot of fun there, and it reflects very well, I think, on the whole hobby. And Otto, if you're listening, I still do owe you that article.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your patience as I try and sail through what ends up being a pretty chaotic year.
Otto, I apologize on Dave's behalf.
I think that's pretty rare. I don't think you normally do that, so thank you.
Oh, I will. Yeah, I'll apologize on behalf of other people.
Just not yourself.
You know what I've noticed lately, and because we're on the free channel, this might be this might scare a lot of people. Actually, we might lose a lot of listeners after this, or we might gain a lot. Lately, you're starting to kind of slip into this like you don't understand me thing, and I'm kind of like, I'm not a nasty guy. I
don't think so.
No, it's like if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I got no problem being wrong. Yeah, you said something. We spent the weekend together at Crescent, Pennsylvania, and you said to me at some point. You said, of course, you were several beers in, so I really didn't take much notice of it.
Well, it sounds like you took some notice of it anyway.
Well, yeah, I know. And he says, "Well, you just have this uncouth way of approaching people," and I'm thinking, what the hell are you talking about?
But I thought you said you wanted to be insulted. Remember?
Oh, I do. That's for sure. Absolutely. If I'm giving you a hard time, I want it right back.
Right,
but I won't do that to somebody unless I think they're good people. I won't insult.
Yeah, but that's something that's interesting about you is that you make that decision very quickly, and you treat a lot of people that way that don't know you yet.
Well, I guess that's possibly true, but that's
all.
But that's because I think they're good people and they can take it. I mean,
exactly. No, you mean I know one of the things I think is great about the way you approach people is that your door's open to everybody, and that means that you don't lose opportunities to get to know fascinating people, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's for sure. We had a great time at Crescent, Pennsylvania.
It was fun. That's the stationinpa.com. Actually, it's just stationinpa.com. But my good longtime friend Alex Lang is the new proprietor there and is doing a bang up job. The place is great.
It is great. I felt like it was. So what's happened is for years, Dave started going when he was 17 years old. I love that discussion we had when I interviewed you. It probably hasn't played yet. Talking about when your mom passed away and those times. I think that'd be a great discussion to have with you someday. I'm fascinated by that discussion because I think being a 17-year-old guy and having your mom being that ill and then basically pass away, really before you even got to university, I think, wasn't it? Didn't she pass before you?
Yeah, it's correct. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I'm saying the word fascinating. I see it as I want to have an in-depth discussion with you someday. And I'd love to do it on the podcast and we started to, but we were sitting on the porch watching trains go by. But I think it would be fascinating because I think it is a huge part of what shaped you, obviously. But I mean, you started this Crescent weekend when you were 17. Your mom was very ill, and you saw an ad in Rail Pace magazine because this fellow Tom Davis had purchased the station in. So this is like 93. And
90, well, he bought it in 93. I went out for the first time in the summer of 94.
Okay. And so, yes. And then you've just every year it's gotten bigger. There's a motorcycle rally in southern Ontario in a place called Port Dover, which is the hometown of Fast Tracks. And there was guys years ago, decades ago, one weekend, 5 of them got together for, rode in on their bikes and had a great weekend. The next year they had, they do it on every Friday the 13th. The next time they had 10 guys. The next time they had 20. And now it's like 50,000 people. And the only thing that restricts your weekend at Crescent is the size of the inn.
Correct. That's an interesting discussion in and of itself. But that is exactly what restricts the weekend at Crescent. That and the fact that what we do is sort of custom there. There's not many groups that do it the way we do it. And so it's a lot of work from a distance to get it to the point where it seems so seamless. Interesting. That's sort of a whole nother ball of wax there, I guess, is trying to figure out how I can sustain, the level of fun that it is for everybody, but get other people to do more of the work. I think that's an important piece of it for functionality.
Well, that's what people forget, eh? I mean, you it's like, we did a small picnic at Rochelle this year, and it's like, I'm not an event planner. I did not start this podcast to be an event planner. And, hats off to the Start boys. David and his brother Bill, who hauled all the barbecue and the cooking and the pop-up tents and pretty much everything we needed. They hauled in the back of Bill Start's dually, a big bed there. And then our buddy Hardpart, Kevin Marks, he went out and bought all the food and organized a thing around Illinois Railroad Museum with his buddy Dave. And, and we only had like 20 people. And it takes a lot of work to do that for 20 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Events take a lot of work. And I love every bit of it. I think events bring people together a lot more than they push people away. And it's tough when you have to necessarily limit it, because otherwise the experience can't be the same if there's more people there than a certain number. That's probably true for any event.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. That's an ongoing challenge, I think.
Well, and it's like, that's kind of what I like about the way the podcast is developed, is there's a Patreon channel. And if you want to pay $5 a month, there, it's an unlimited amount of people that can come. Now, we're already talking about Comstock 2024, and we're thinking how many people can we take, and yada yada yada. And that's what I hate about operating sessions. It's like you meet more. That's one of the problems with the new digital social media world, is you meet so many people that you want to include, but you only have so much room.
That's true.
That's
why you got to have a double-ended staging yard. That'll do it. Like, your railroad can be so much more fluid with a double-ending staging yard. I mean, obviously, that's an oversimplification. There's a million variables in every operating session. But one of the fun things about the OC is that it doesn't take that long to learn it. You hear a couple times, you start to figure it out. We can even do some remote stuff, which isn't the same as in person, but offers an opportunity to participate, to some degree, which I think has been a lot of fun, especially with the AML Nation, because, we've had people operating from Australia, from Scotland, at the same time on one operating session. It's pretty amazing.
You must have already started with your newfound notoriety. I was going to say popularity, but then you're assuming that everybody likes you. With your newfound notoriety in model railroading, like, that must be starting to become an ongoing problem. People that want to come and operate on the OC, and there's just no room for them.
Well, there's actually more people that just want to come see it, and then have requested an operating session slot. We've accommodated some operating session slots, and that'll be, that's certainly an opportunity as things go forward. But I think, now that the pandemic is fading into the rearview mirror, and some of the RPMs have started up again, there's talk of possibly of a New Jersey RPM in the next year or two. And nothing official, but if that were to come to pass, I would find a way to have the railroad open for tours, at least, and even have trains running for the tour, because I think, having people be able to see a train go by adds more fascination than just seeing a layout that's sitting there turned off.
Yeah.
And so open houses, I think, are an important component, I think, going forward for the hobby.
Have you thought of just having an OC open house an OC day for people to come by? I mean, just do it something like that. Or
I've given it some thought, and I think it would be more fun for people if it was more than just the OC.
Yeah.
Because, even if you come and stay for an hour, it's to travel all this way and only be here for an hour, like there needs to be other activities that are looped into that, in my opinion, if possible. So it's one of those ideas that's in the percolator, and we'll see where it goes. But yeah, I think there's an opportunity there's an appetite for that, I should say. And I like your point about notoriety, because I definitely think not everybody can like everybody.
No.
There's definitely some people that don't see this as being, they aren't quite as supportive as everybody else, and which is fine.
Well, and
each their own.
Well, yeah, and it's a discussion you and I have together quite a bit. I mean, it's, one of the things I dislike about the podcast is now there's like people that don't like me because of the podcast. And I'm thinking, I just wanted to talk to people.
Well,
and,
again,
and you've run into the same kind of problem. And it's kind of like Well, you like sharing the OC with people, and it's kind of like, so like that's not what this hobby is about at all. But
I think there's the hobby. It has room for everyone that wants to be part of the hobby. In my opinion, I just don't subscribe to the thought that there's not a space for everybody in the hobby. Is there a space for everybody at every operating session? No. But there is a space for everybody at just about every RPM or train show.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I sure learned that experience. I sure had that experience at Dave Owens and those guys and their Northeast RPM. I mean, talk about... I never met two guys like Dave Owens and John Sacerdoti. John's the guy that is the show director of Amherst, the Springfield show, the Big E, whatever you want to call it. And Dave Owens, who runs NERPM. I've never met two guys that were so much about building the hobby and being inclusive and trying to give everybody. You would fit in right. You would fit right in with those guys because they're the same as you. They're all about making the world a better place through the hobby of model railroading.
Yeah, John Sacerdoti is a guy I'm looking forward to meeting him hopefully in the next year. And that Amherst show is just, it holds a very special place in my heart. Not just this recent time, but the times that I was there years ago as well. It literally has something for everybody. If you like anything to do with trains, that's the show you need to be at. And the NERPM is legendary. I didn't learn about that until I already had kids. And so time is just harder to come by when you're raising young kids. And going to Springfield and going to an operating weekend or two over the course of the year and going to Crescent like we just did, these weekends start to add up. And my wife, Kristen, is at home with 3 young kids. It's a lot to ask her, to keep adding on these long weekends when I'm off having a blast and talking about trains all the time and meeting people and drinking beer and just having a great time. And I come home and Kristen's like, can you take the kids? And I'm like, yeah, but then I have to go to work on Monday, and it's a balance. It's a balance, but that NERPM that's a high end RPM. And it's one that I think probably will be more popular than it is now each year going forward. The quality of the stuff that's presented there every year is just incredible.
And the inclusiveness of the crowd.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's got everything that a Chicagoland or a, St. Louis RPM, right? Or the Bay Area, like the big ones, the big boys, Cocoa Beach. It's got all of that, but with a New England flair from some of the biggest names in the hobby. It's a fantastic opportunity. It falls at a tough time for me every year, and that's one of the reasons I haven't gotten there, but I will. And I'm very excited about that someday. That's just, look, you can't help but be excited. There's so many great things to do in this hobby.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way you can get to it all. I think that's exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It can be frustrating, but it's definitely very exciting.
Yes. Look, I mean, when you feel like you're missing something, that's not fun. And I know that feeling all too well. The first big thing in my life that I, when I was in my adult life, I should say, that I missed in the hobby that really drove me nuts was that whole Norfolk Southern Spencer Heritage weekend that they did in 2012. We had a baby girl that was a week from being born. The house was torn apart. We're putting an addition in the attic. I'm working full time. It's hot. And NS announces this thing on July 4th weekend, which is the biggest weekend of the year here in town in Lebanon. And because we have a big parade and party and all this other stuff in town. And I had to watch that on social media from a distance. Steam on Horseshoe Curve, steam at the ledge. I mean, and I couldn't go. And I was not a happy camper. I was not a pleasant person to be around in those couple of weeks because I felt like I was missing out. And you hate feeling like you're missing out.
Yeah, and it's a real problem and I mean, it's going to be have you given thought to how you're going to go forward in the future? Because I often think to myself, man, it's like people got to be pulling at you at 3-4 different directions, 34 different directions all the time.
Yeah, it's, having a smartphone and a train ride to and from work is very helpful, because I get on the train and that's my time to catch up on email, make Facebook posts and schedule them for a certain time, update the OC blog page or Facebook page, as it were, or my own Facebook page. So it's good social media time, and it allows some time for reflection and looking out the window and watching trains go the other way. And it's good therapy for the 24/7 nature of the modern world, but also the modern model railroading hobby. It never stops.
Yeah, I think that's a whole discussion in itself. The modern model railroading hobby is completely different than the hobby that I grew up in, 40 years ago. It's like totally different. It's like, I keep thinking to myself lately about, the first time I got one of those Atlas Cato yellow box diesels, an RS3 or whatever, and I put it on the track. And up until then, I'd only been exposed to the Athearn blue box, which,
Sure.
You were used to, and they ran okay.
Yep.
I will never forget the first time I put one of those Cato RS3s on the track and turned it on. I was dumbfounded.
You can't hear it. It just starts to move.
Yeah.
And it moves at speed step. Like, as soon as you crack that little DC throttle,
yeah,
it starts to crawl like a watch, the second hand on a watch, without clicking. And like, I actually have one of my engines on my M&E, on Manoa and Euclid here. My M&E 19 I painted that when I was in high school in 1992, 93. And it still runs like that today, Lionel. It is.
Yeah.
What a mechanism was that Cato mechanism. Unbelievable.
I know. It's like, well, I told this story on several podcasts now. I was at the Illinois Railroad Museum when we were at Rochelle, and they have a new brick building there. And one of the things they have is several layouts inside the building. And one wall is model railroad stuff donated by people that want to donate it they give it to the museum, and the museum sells it at, reduced prices. And there was 2 in the box undecorated Stewart F units.
Wow.
the
FTs or F3s. Yep.
Yeah, and the A units, right? And I love running the A units back to back. I just think that's a cool look. And I'm looking at these, and Stephen Hayworth Stephen goes, "These are really good." They were $35 each.
Oh my God, how can you go wrong? I would have bought them for that. And let's hear it for the back-to-back look. That is I don't care what locomotive model it is, if it's a diesel, or even if it's electric. I guess a lot of them are double-ended. But when it comes to diesels, back-to-back is classic. It doesn't matter if it's a pair of SD70 ACEs today,
yep, or
if it's a pair of FTs from 1938 or whatever, or 2 RS3s. Or it doesn't even matter which hood is forward. Like, if it's cab to cab or long hood to long hood, it's just a cool look. It's very symmetrical.
Yeah, I mean, and when we were sitting at Crescent there, I mean, the beauty of Crescent, for people that haven't been, you got to go.
It needs to be a bucket list item. It does.
You just got to suck it up and go, because I had never been exposed to it until 2 years ago, and it's like sitting on that porch, which is, when I was interviewing you guys, we were literally, I guessed, 100 feet from the track.
That's almost exactly what it is. Yep. And it's 100 feet from the busiest mountain main line in the Western Hemisphere, at least at different times. Cajon can probably make an argument for that. They've certainly upped trains there. Again, it ebbs and it flows. But when you count the helper movements, Horseshoe Curve is right there. The former PRR main line is right there. It's a 1% grade. You're on this giant front porch, which is, the way I describe it to people is, it's the best place I've ever been in my life to watch trains in the rain.
Yes.
Is that front porch.
Yeah.
You can sit down with a cup of coffee or a beer, a soda, a beverage of your choice. You can get pizza delivered, and there's some decent pizza, not great pizza, but decent pizza in town. Or you can go to, get a sandwich, what have you, and sit there on a rocking chair with whatever coat you need to have on to stay relatively warm. And you just watch the story unfold. They've got a scanner feed, they've got webcams, and you watch modern railroading on a trunk line in real time.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating.
It really is. And I mean, and then every once in a while, more than twice and less than 100 times a day, a pair of helpers drift by.
Yep. That's right. And they're big. They're former SD-90 Max that have been rebuilt to Juniata. So they're almost always back to back.
Almost always back to back. And you'll be sitting there and we're fortunate enough to have Josh there who's connected to every possible piece of information about the Norfolk Southern. And he knows he's telling you what trains are coming. And there was a big storm went through on the Saturday and knocked some trees down on the line out near Harrisburg. So it backed trains up. And then he said, trains are going to start rolling. And then from 9 o'clock to like midnight, it was train after train after train going by. And I didn't care. It was in the dark because it's the sound. The sound. You're sitting there in a rocking chair. Track is dead on eye level. And it's train after train going by, and it's a 1% grade going east. So, I mean, those trains are just the wicked sound they make. It's just what a find that place was. And before Tom Davis bought it, was it a rail place, or was it just an inn, or was it deserted, or what was it?
It was a tenement house, a tenement apartment when Tom Davis bought it. And originally, the building, I think it dates from 1866, and it was a railroad hotel. It was the Callan House, they called it. And it was a PRR-funded hotel that was the place where people would get off to sleep. They did some of that down in Altoona, but they also had trains that overnighted in Crescent. And it was they had the bar in the basement and the rooms upstairs. So that's why it was built, was as a thoroughfare hotel. And once they created Pullman cars and overnight sleeper trains, of course, that use went away. But it's been loosely affiliated with the railroad ever since its origins.
Yeah, and right in front of the station inn, there's a pedestrian underpass under the tracks.
Yep, that used to be the subway to get to the two center island platforms. So the tracks used to bow right in front of the inn. So you could get on a track. You could basically get on or off a passenger train on any one of the 5 tracks that are there.
It's an unbelievable place. It really truly
is cool. It's cool.
So when Tom bought it, was there tenants in it, and he had to wait till people moved out, or what?
There was a few rooms that were empty. He moved into one off the common room. The Reading room was his original apartment, and I think he had 1 or 2 rooms for rent in November, December of 1993. And then as leases expired and people moved on, he would renovate the rooms and put them up for sale, basically through Railpace and Railfanning Railroad, Carson's publishing, were the 2 places he advertised early on, being from New Jersey, originally from Baltimore and most of his life in New Jersey. And the business grew. And at the time of the videos that Heath has put together, you see interviews with Tom in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And, that was the zenith of the inn. Tom had the whole place was railfan rooms by that point. And he was running in the summertime, 95% occupancy. And even in the wintertime, he was at 40% even in the middle of the winter. So really, really a pretty remarkable accomplishment for somebody that had been a lifelong educator and locomotive engineer.
And now,
pretty remarkable when you think about it.
What was it like? He would have this old timers meet in the winter. And what was that like? Like, what was it? Was it because was it cold? I mean, it was obviously cold. You guys did it in February. Like, would you stand on the porch and watch trains? Like, what was that about?
So he established that for his best regular customers. And I was always a little miffed that he only invited me and not more people from my crowd, right? My group that's been going together out there for 30 years or 30 years. There's 3 of us that have gone every year for 30 years now. And there's a handful more that missed a year or 2 here or there. And Tom invited just me. And I remember calling him and saying, Tom, can we at least bring out the original 5? And Tom's like, well, Dave, you're the one that makes the reservation. And I'm only inviting the people that make the reservations. I said, okay. He's like, I'm out of space. I said, I understand. So he picked his lowest occupancy weekend of the year, which was generally Super Bowl weekend, the first weekend in February. And the first couple of years, it was free. Come out, stay as long as you like. I'm going to assign you a roommate or 2, depending on, when you come and when you leave and who I think you get along with. And watch trains with us in the winter and spend time here. It's a gift to my best customers. And so I was invited to the first one in the year 2000, the first official one anyway, in the year 2000. That's where I met Alex Lang, who owns the inn now. It's where I met John Kays, who's an Amtrak locomotive engineer. It's where I met Lou Capwell, who works on passenger trains as a volunteer pretty much on these URHS, United Railway Historical Society trips on the back of Amtrak out of New York Penn Station with the Hickory Creek, the former 20th Century Limited observation car. I met Lou at Old Timers Weekend through Alex. I met Mike Filoni. You met this weekend.
Right.
I met him at the Old Timers Weekend through Alex.
Great guy. Great guy.
Steve Tedesco. I crossed paths with him at the end before, but he's a brilliant guitar player, blues guitar player, unbelievable. And he sat in with us. We played live music this weekend, which is why my voice is still hoarse. I oversang a little bit, but we had some fun. But I met Steve at Old Timers Weekend. So Tom Davis really found a way to draw people together that it's created lifelong friendships. It really has. And so Old Timers Weekend was a real privilege to be part of that early on. And now Steve comes to my little summer shindig. A few of the other old timers have stopped in over the years. And it's all good news. It's all good energy.
Fascinating. Eh? And this is just at the dawn of the internet age.
Yeah. No, Tom didn't have a website in 1994 because almost nobody did.
Yeah.
So, I saw the ad, literally saw the print ad in Railpace News Magazine as a 17-year-old kid. And I'd always wanted to go to Horseshoe Curve. Now I had a place I could stay. So when I called out there, Tom was all excited. It's, new customers. And he didn't even ask how old I was. And if I'm this excited now, can you imagine what I must have sounded like as a 17-year-old squeaky kid?
Well, yeah. And you'd only had your driver's license, a few months?
Yeah, like 8 months. Yep. I got it. When did I got it? January 4th, 1994. Right ahead of one of the first big blizzard of 1994 down here in New Jersey.
Yeah, like you got it basically, a few days after your birthday?
Yeah, exactly. Like 3 days after my birthday. Yep.
Wow.
It was so exciting. Yep.
Jeez. And then you go out there and look at what it's created. Now, I found this year it had a different vibe from last year. Do you notice that?
Last year was the first time you went.
Yeah, but it definitely had a different vibe, I thought. For me, it did anyways. I still had a good time and everything, but it was just a different vibe, I thought.
Like everything, it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
There's years that are crazier and there's years that are more quiet. There's years with more people or less people over the course of 30 years. I still can't believe it's been 30 years.
Yeah, to do that.
That's a long time for a human to do anything.
It sure is. And have you noticed over the years that some years you kind of go away going, well, that wasn't as much fun as last year?
Well, sometimes it's frustrating. The years when Tom was very ill and they didn't have cutting edge management at the inn, a lot of stuff went wrong. The beer system wouldn't work. There was no breakfast one year, or the breakfast was terrible because Chris had left over a feud with the manager at the time, and it was that kind of stuff. Change is hard, Lionel.
Yeah.
Change is hard, and when an establishment like that changes, and it's not what you're expecting, and you're the leader of the group, the one that puts it together, it kind of falls on you to bail it out.
Yeah.
And so there's been years that I came back from Creston and I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm going to do this anymore.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's just too much.
Yeah.
And bunch of people come out and don't even bother to say thank you and just assume it's going to be great. It's like, guys,
I know people.
I don't ask for much.
I know people.
Come and have a good time, but say thanks, please.
That's one of the things I find the most frustrating about the podcast. Is sometimes I'm like, hey, like this wouldn't be happening if I wasn't here. Like, hello, anybody? And you're kind of just going, and then you kind of and you never. Most of the time, it's never done with any intent. It's just people. Correct. Usually, what it is people are having so much fun, they forget. They just simply forget.
Yeah. No, look, I agree. And if you're doing it for the fun, that's great. If you're doing it for the thanks, well, you probably shouldn't be doing it the way you're doing it. And, in the end, something that you're doing for the podcast is opening people's doors in the hobby. And that's making people happy. And in the end, what I'm doing at Crescent or an Onondaga Cutoff operating session is, opening the doors in the hobby. It's look, there's no easy way out, right? So you could do it serving other people, or you could do it taking some for yourself. And somewhere between those things at any given point, there's a balance for everybody. And that changes too. But the bottom line is that doing something for somebody else in and of itself does make you feel good. It does have merit. And that sort of, we've talked about it before on Patreon for sure. And I think we've mentioned it certainly in passing here on the public channel. But, there's an obligation with some of this stuff. If you attend an operating session, you're obliged, you're responsible, right, to help recreate the layout owner's vision of what that operating session is going to be. It's a very personal thing. It's an intimate thing to be at an operating session. Open houses, those come and go, right? But an operating session is different. It's special. And, Crescent to me, it's not a place. It's an experience. And it's special to me. It's something that I share with people that appreciate it, that want to be part of something that I hope brings a lot of energy to them. I think it's a great time. It's certainly something I look forward to. And last year I came back totally, utterly exhausted. It was fun, but it was a lot of change. It was Alex's first year owning the inn, but he didn't officially own it yet. So I had to do almost all the work when it came to the downstairs. A lot of storage and stuff wasn't clean. They were doing some improvements. Alex was very busy handling a lot of that project stuff, but Joe Davis, Tom's brother, the estate still owned the inn. So it was a very tough year to manage that. This year, it's the Lang family owns the Station Inn. So all the beds were made. All the rooms were clean. The cook was back in residence. Stuff got cleaned up. I knew the rates were ahead of time. We could pay with a credit card. Alex made that easy. So lots of stuff this year worked much better. And I had more time to reflect this Crescent, just to meditate a little bit, to not meditate like Zen or anything, but sit back and just watch trains go by quietly at a couple different spots on the mountain by myself or with close friends, and just take it easy. A moment of silence with the railroad, which is something I've always loved, which is sort of funny because I love to talk too, but but the being able to sit, and just take it in, listen to the birds and watch the leaves move in the breeze, listen to, a distant air horn of an approaching train. There's something very therapeutic about that. And we're model railroading. So much of that you have to do yourself, or you're intimately involved in somebody's vision at a session. On the prototype, you just go sit by the tracks and it comes to you.
Well, that's why I said once to you, I was looking for a train there was being our young friend, his worship, the mayor of Warren Payne, George, was a conductor on it. So I was at a place where the train was coming, maybe 30 miles from my home. It was a beautiful summer day. And when I got there, the Canadian, a famous passenger train, was just pulling into the station. And, I watched it and took a few shots. And then another freight train came. And I was there for like 2.5 hours, and I thought, this is like fishing. You know, you sit there and you wait for a bite, and you sit there patiently, and you're just contemplating life and sitting there and casting out and trying to catch a fish that you can't see. and you know, then one comes by and it's like, yeah, great. And the train goes by, or you catch the fish and you go back to doing the same thing where you're trying to catch a fish you can't see, or you're waiting for a train that you don't know if it's coming. And it can be very, very relaxing.
Relaxing and then satisfying. You know, satisfying in that you know, that way that, you know, how many millions of years of humans have had to go wait for an animal to walk by to trap it or catch it, or wait for a field to grow, or, you know, sit and, I don't know, cook a meal over the fire for how many thousands or millions of years. Like, it's a very, very old human tradition to have to wait for something good. And one of the challenges, I think, for all of us today, and this goes to the news hound or the model railroader or the musician or, you know, the parent or the office worker. With social media, all of this stuff comes so quickly. It looks like everybody else is outpacing you all the time. It appears they're having more fun than you. They're happier than you. They're more satisfied than you. But none of that is actually necessarily the case. You can't tell. It just feels that way because of the way these pieces of software are designed to work. It's designed to grab your attention and make you push a button. So railfanning, railroading, fishing, right? Farming, gardening, painting, reading, traveling, all of these things still take a lot of time and energy. And consciously deciding to focus on those things rather than, you know, constantly staying on social media and telling all your friends about what meal you're having or whatever. like there's nothing wrong with that stuff, but you've got to do it in measured amounts. You have to have a mindful engagement with social media. If you're watching the news all the time, you're not going to be a healthy person in the long term. News was never intended to be 24 hours a day. Yeah. And you can get yourself in trouble with stuff like that these days because it's all right there. It's all easy and it doesn't cost you anything besides your phone. So it's interesting. That's the hobby really provides an antidote to modern life with enough of modern life mixed in that you can still, you know, get some of that satisfaction and you can still connect with people. But it's actually a real pleasure to go to a train show and buy a yellow box Atlas engine and detail and paint it.
Yeah, I miss that. I liked those yellow box years.
And you can do it. Yeah. Just go do it.
I think
you can buy it. Like, it's a choice. We have to make a choice to focus on those things.
I think that's why I bought those 2F units, because it just gave me so many great memories of having this blank canvas that I would, you know, paint and decorate and detail. And, you know,
I think you should do it. I think you should write an article and see what happens. Yeah. That's what I think you should do. People would love that. Are you kidding?
I know they would. Well,
that would be great. But that would be great.
The problem,
but you have to give me some credit. I came up with the idea.
Sure, absolutely. If it wasn't for you, the podcast would have died years ago.
Yeah, right. I have a hard time believing that.
but isn't that a big part of it, though? I mean, look how much you've added to the podcast and how much lots of other people have added to the podcast. And really, all I am is just the conduit that keeps it all going. I mean, you know.
That's what Heath says. Heath, my good friend, who makes these wonderful videos and documentaries, works at NJ Transit and fascinating, brilliant storyteller at core. And you know, Heath finds a way to connect with people wherever he is. And he calls himself a conduit for the spirit, a conduit for the energy from the great beyond, whatever you want to label it as. And I understand what he's saying because I don't remember having written a lot of my articles. I don't remember having whatever passion it was that drove certain chapters in the Signal book, or that I've got another book I'm putting together for Kalmbach on yard design and operation for model railroaders. I don't remember having written, the first 15,000 words of that either. Like, you are a conduit for that energy. I would argue that that's one of the reasons your podcast is so successful, is that you allow it to go where the guest takes you. You're very good at drawing out, I think, the core of what your guests have to say. It's very interesting. The David Hyde podcast, you did a fireside chat with him, and you did one recently with Scott Lister as well. And these are both names that are all over the podcast, of course. But what amazing people doing such interesting, amazing things. It's just an exciting time to be in the hobby. All of this stuff is right at our fingertips. I mean, how many people out there listen to this honestly don't think about the hobby when you're at work? I mean, come on. I mean, you can't stop thinking about the hobby these days. Model railroading and rail fanning, between social media, all the fabulous photography that's available just on Facebook or at Flickr. I'm looking at Mark Hemphill's pictures on Flickr, and my God, the guy has regained all of his form in photography that he might have had in the 80s, plus 100%, and he's a better writer now than he was in the 80s, which is saying a lot. Like, you can find Mel Patrick's stuff out there. You can find Steve Schmallinger's stuff. Like, these are legendary photographers and railroad writers of our generation. And the stuff's just out there for us to look at and enjoy. It's amazing.
And the thing I constantly say, I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll say it thousands and thousands of times. It's like this hobby is massive. Like you were talking to me about, we were having a texting conversation, and you mentioned the name Lenny Harlow, and blah, 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 what a great weather guy he is, and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, I just bluntly said to you, I have no idea who these people are. I know the name, Lenny Harlow, vaguely, but other than that, I have no idea who these people are. And, at the RPM meet, I met Butch Eiler's friend Dave, and I want to get them on the podcast. And, I've had a couple of back and forth texts, and then it's like I got distracted and I'm off somewhere else because, I want to talk to Chris Palmieri about, home shops and all the cars that he's doing. And I know he's doing something with you,
Yes. Well, we're starting to work towards an Onondaga cutoff Conrail boxcar. A couple different ideas floating around, so stay tuned on that. And plenty more to come, from the Onondaga cutoff. I mean, it like you said, it's been a wild 7 or 8 year ride here, but it's just getting started. I mean, the layout's not even done yet. Like, yeah. I've still got the entire town of Fayetteville to build.
Yeah, and thank God you've got Scott Lister helping you with that.
That's exciting. And Jason Warmeck, who helped me so much, with the farm scene and the Interstate 481 scene. I mean, scenery is something I had only ever learned on my own or through the pages of the magazine. And, these guys are master scenery builders. Jason Warmeck's stuff is one of the reasons the layout went as far as it did, as quickly as it did. These scenes came together with a master hand, and he showed me how to do a lot of stuff. I'm indebted. I'm really grateful for the contributions of a lot of people on the Onondaga cutoff. It absolutely is one of those cases where the total is greater than the sum of the parts.
Well, and you're way better at that than I am, because I was never very good at turning stuff over to other people, because I was always one of these people. If I didn't build it and I didn't know how it worked, I never wanted to get stuck not knowing how something worked because somebody else was the person that did it. And I just kind of, it's just a thing of mine. Everybody has personality quirks, and that was a quirk of mine, is that I didn't, if it was a structure and somebody wanted to build a structure, well, that's fine. But when it came to the wiring or any of that kind of stuff, I always was like terrified. Like, I need to know how to do it. Otherwise, I don't want to be ever stuck.
Oh, I think that's a very reasonable way to look at this. One of the disadvantages in the era when you were building layouts, though, was that a lot of this stuff was very customized. The wiring today, DCC wiring is far simpler than what you had to do with all the rotating knobs and all this other stuff, with DC. I mean, there's nothing wrong with DC just straight up, transformer cab control if you're running a short line with one engine. That's fine. You miss out on some of the lighting, you miss out on some of the sound effects, but you can work around that stuff and still have fun with it. I think that's fine. But DCC has made an operating railroad with multiple crews so much more fun, so easy to get to. And there's very reasonably priced entry-level DCC systems, direct command control systems, that allow that access, to be there. So, but what's changed is that you look at JMRI, the Java Model Railroad Interface. That's the software. The CATS, the Krandic Automated Traffic System, is part of the JMRI package and allows an overlay that can drive your signals. So I was able to accept a lot of help getting my signals up and running from signal professionals because the software is now available on the internet. In your era, that was not the case. Signaling was all something you had to do on your own. So there's still a leap of faith there. You still have to, decide who you want to trust with different parts of your railroad. And it is a big decision even still. But in the case of the Onondaga cutoff, to get it up and running, that was my vision. My goal was I've always wanted to sit at somebody's stop signal. I mean, how cool is that? To run a train, get an approach, then get a stop signal and come to a stop and sit and wait. I mean, how many times have we seen that trackside as rail fans? Everybody has seen that trackside as a rail fan. I never had that chance until I built the Onondaga cutoff.
And that's one of the things when I've operated on the OC is I'd like to see some of the signals go red, more of the signals go red, so I had to stop. Sometimes I feel like I'm just flying right across the course.
Well, yeah, it does depend on which train you got.
Yeah.
And it's now that we've added the fabulous Rapido Trains turbo liner to the Onondaga cutoff.
Or is that going to be
RapidoTrains.com? Aren't they the guys that sponsor this podcast?
Yes, RapidoTrains.com. Your fast track to model railroading fun. We've done a lousy job at this.
If it's N, if it's H-O, the fast track is Rapido.
Well, no, that's number 2. That was the minimum. We're not done yet.
We're an hour in, for crying out loud.
Well, I guess that's true. Well, you can edit out some of this. It was just me talking.
Yeah, I'll just you know what? I'll just put a whole bunch of jingles in there. To heck with it.
But the Rapido Trains turbo liner now being added, and this is actually the second. Rapido Trains has changed passenger operations for modern model, probably for every modeler, but certainly for Amtrak modelers. I hope someday they come out with the Amfleet coaches. But I have a Walters Amfleet train, but I have a Rapido, actually several Rapido F40 PHs to pull them. And now with the Rapido turbo liner, there's going to be a lot more waiting for freight trains on the Onondaga cutoff because we're going to add more passenger trains.
So how do you justify having the turbo liner on the OC? Did it ever run on the high line between Chicago and Buffalo?
Oh, well, not between Chicago and Buffalo,
but Buffalo.
It was several assignments daily through Syracuse.
Oh, really?
It was an Empire Service train, so it would run from New York to Albany, and then some of them would continue west from Albany Rensselaer all the way to Buffalo. I don't know that they ever ran to Toronto.
Well, and what years was the turbo liner on the running from Syracuse to Albany and what have you?
I would say 80s. Late 80s and early 90s for sure, and possibly before that as well.
But you're modeling the 90s.
1994.
So
and there's a ton of pictures of turboliner equipment in 1993, 94, 95, still running through Syracuse.
So It does fit into your...
Very much. And in fact, it's one of those trains you see, and whether you like the turboliner or not, it's one of those good models of a common prototype.
It just looks like it just wouldn't fit into your railroad at all.
Oh, you got to go on the rrpicturearchives.net or any one of the picture repositories and just Google Amtrak Turbo Train Syracuse, and there's a dozen pictures that pop up all through the years.
And are you going to weather it or something?
It's already weathered. I just finished it yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
It's weathered. It's programmed. It was a bit of a bear to program because of the way I run trains here on the OC. I want to make sure crews, can use all the lighting features from either end. But it's got two separate power cars, one on either end. Consisting them changes the way the lighting works. So it was a lot of work to program it, but I figured it out, and I think it's going to be a very popular feature of the OC. I mean, it was never my favorite train. I would rather see an F40 and 5 cars, or I would much rather see a GP40 TC or an FL9 and 5 cars. But the Turboliner, if I've seen one, I've seen 100 of them up there in the time that I was up there. When they announced it, there was no choice. I had to get one. It fits the era, and it definitively lets you know that you're on the Chicago line in the 80s or 90s.
Had to get one. They had you do the video.
I had to get one. I had to order from Train World in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and
which is a great shop, and they do stock trains from rapidotrains.com.
Your fast track to model railroading fun.
Rapido Trains, your fast track to model railroading fun.
I have this. I just want to give Jason and Rapido Trains way more than I want to give them. I'm anal about making sure they get their money's worth.
Well, I think Jason's made a business decision, and Jason has a lot of faith in the podcast, just like, we have a lot of faith in Jason. Look, none of this stuff is easy, man.
I think
it's just not easy.
Where do you see yourself in? Let's pick a short period, 5 years. Like, where do you see yourself? Like, you got another book coming up. When is that? When is it due to be finished?
The manuscript is due in November 2023. So my guess is it'll probably be April, May of 2024 when it gets out there to the market.
So how close are you to finishing it?
I'm getting there now. I'm organizing some photographs. Most of the text is done. I've got a couple sidebars put together. So I'm probably 80% there.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
When do you do this?
That's another thing I'm able to do on the train.
You write the text on the train?
Beauty of having a laptop. Yep. Is that I'm able to get on the train. I take a little nap. I wake up 20 minutes into my ride, and then I spend, 15, 20 minutes. And with a laptop, anytime you want to write, you just open it up and go.
For sure.
Talk about something that's changed all the creative endeavors. How about digital photography? How about digital writing?
Oh my God.
Google sharing. I mean, it just doesn't end.
Yeah. That's why I think this hobby is just, I think you're considerably younger than me, and I think you're in for the ride of your life. I feel like this hobby is going to become much more mainstream. I think there's tons of people that are discovering it through the internet, like that didn't really even know what it was, because it's like I always joke, Al Gore invented the internet specifically for model railroading because we were all in our basements. Yeah, we would go to NMRA meets, and you'd go to but meeting people, unless you were a very gregarious person and wanted to get involved, it was hard to meet people. For every 100 people you meet now, you met 3 before.
Right. I mean, it's just a different world.
I would have never gone to Crescent had it not been for the internet and the podcast and meeting you, and you would have never met me had you not, had Rich not discovered the podcast, and on it goes, and it just
Rich Wisniewski, what a treasure of a guy. I mean, he not only did he introduce me to the podcast and encourage me to email you and see if there was an opportunity to be part of the podcast. Not only did he do that, he also introduced me to the whole operating community here in New Jersey. Back in 2012, 2013, that was the first time he started to say, hey, I mean, I met him at work at NJ Transit, but he started to say, hey, my friend Jerry Dietzick, he really should see your layout. He lives in Pattenberg. And I said, that's funny because I graduated high school with his daughter. She was in my class and I never saw the layout. I've heard his name my whole life and we just never put two and two together. I never got over there.
And imagine if you'd gotten over there when you were, leaving high school, you'd had a whole entire different life. But that's
my gosh. Yep.
But that's a problem.
But you know what? But it is a problem, but it's also important perspective. One of the things, again, we'll do another podcast at some time about, my mom and sister and all that whole chapter of my life. But, there was therapy involved with getting over some of those losses. I'm not afraid to admit that one bit because of the unbelievable perspective that gave me. But one of the things the therapist that I had seen after those years was a Jungian therapist. Carl Jung is was an author of a bunch of philosophy books and what have you. And there's a Buddhist bent to it, but very much, whole life perspective kind of stuff. And one of the things Roseanne, the counselor that I was seeing, said, she's like, Dave, you carry a lot of weight because of the shadows you've dealt with in your life, the dark side of things. There's no shame in that. I mean, that just shows that you're appreciating it for what it is. There's a lot of energy in the dark stuff. It's not all good stuff. There's just as much energy and opportunity to learn from the hard things, maybe more. She said, but one of the things that I want you to consider is that what if everything in your life right now, at this present moment, what if everything in your life right now is exactly as it's supposed to be? And I was on my heels immediately. I said, well, but what about, I'm going for a promotion. Like, should I not go? My mom and sister have passed away. That's not as it's supposed to be. She's like, it's hard. And she smiled and she says, but I want you to just you're not going to do it today. She says, but as time goes on, I want you to try and pause and take a breath and imagine, what if everything right now is exactly as it's supposed to be, with all of the challenges and all the loss, but all the opportunities and all the excitement, all the possibilities, all the extra experience. What if it's all supposed to be just like this, with the strong thunderstorms and, all the talk and the threat of a global warming, the talk and threat of nuclear war? Name your global concern, right? Immigration, whatever it is that's driving you nuts. What if it's all okay? And it's very ethereal. How do you can't put your finger on stuff like this, but it's food for thought. And I think it reflects on the hobby today as much as it reflects on anything else. Maybe everything in the hobby right now is exactly as it's supposed to be. And that's why it's growing so quickly. That's why it's so tangible. Yes, the hobby shops, there's a lot less hobby shops than there were, but there's some new ones. But there's also a lot more RPMs. Those didn't exist 30 years ago. Not to my knowledge, anyway. Operations hardly existed 30 years ago. There was maybe a couple weekends a year. But today, if you wanted to, you could operate 52 weekends a year. I'm sure of it. Jim Dahlberg, as a guy in the greater Philadelphia model railroad and railfan community, interesting guy. He went to the U.S. Naval Academy and graduated, I believe, in 1958. Still operating on model railroads today. And when I met him in 2013, Jim Dahlberg, the previous year, 2012, had operated at 257 operating sessions.
He kept track.
In a year, in 365 days.
So he had kept track. He had kept track. He's retired, single, and his kids work for the railroad. He had worked for Conrail, but and there's weekends where you can go and have 5 or 6 operating sessions in 2 or 3 days. So, but think 257 operating sessions in a calendar year.
That's just incredible. And that was 2012. Like, yeah, the pandemic slowed some of the stuff down, but now you can go right back and do all that stuff again. It's it's amazing. It's simply amazing.
Well, and you were talking there earlier about the, going to see a therapist and with and it's like the one thing I think about, having gone through the thing with cancer is, and I was talking about this today to somebody, and it's really hard to describe, but I think it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. At the same time, it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me.
Yeah, but isn't that the way life goes? I mean, that's it. That's the shadow side. You learn more in the second half of life from the hard stuff and from leaning into the pain, leaning into the discomfort. You learn more from that than you learn from the good stuff in second half of life. I stand by that.
Yeah, like I was telling the story today, and it still sticks with me. I was probably, I don't know, it was less than a year, but I was at this Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto, and it was like it's one of the best places in the world, ranked 3rd or 4th in the world. And when I was on this experimental stuff, when I was being a lab rat, one of the best damn lab rats they ever had, I had to constantly have EKGs and have, they were terrified they were killing me at the same time. And I used to have these EKGs, and I would have them, air quotes, in the one of the places you would go is in the emergency room of Princess Margaret Hospital. Well, in actual fact, Princess Margaret Hospital doesn't really have an emergency room because everybody's there with a pre-diagnosed condition of cancer. But I was in there one day, and they wheeled in this young girl on a stretcher. Couldn't have been more than 25. And it was pretty obvious that, this was the last time they were wheeling her into the hospital. And I constantly think to myself, man, if I had never gone through that experience, I would have never, it just sunk into me at that moment. Man, there's a lot of people way worse off than me. Way worse off than me. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in your own self-pity. And the illusion is everybody thinks they're in control of their life. And you're not, it's like, you're not. It's like,
no, I mean, at least not in some ways. And look, I'm not sitting here telling anybody that I've got it under control, because I don't. Like, you have your ups and downs. You have your dark days. It's easy when things are good, right, to talk about, how you can survive a hard time. It's much harder to do it in real time.
Yeah.
But you can still do it. It's still a decision. You don't get to choose what happens to you. You do get to choose how you react to it.
Does this make any sense to you? As we were having this discussion, I thought this today. Is what model railroading offers people once they discover it is, it has so many elements to it in that it's something you can do on your own, very quietly, to collect yourself. You'll be working, even if you're more into the ready-to-run stuff, but, you still got to lay track. You still got to, connect wires. Like, you're still working on your model railroad, no matter whether you're doing weathering or whatever. So there's a lot of quiet time, chances for self-introspection. There's a lot of that. But then there's the opportunity at the same time in the same hobby to gather together with friends, to feel like you're part of society, to feel like you're not alone on the planet. Like, I wonder if that's what's, because of social media and the fact that people are finding the hobby, they're discovering that really this hobby offers so many things about life. Not like everybody says, the hobby offers you, some people like electronics, some people like building structures, but I think the other side that we're missing is that the hobby offers a lot of life experience. It's like this podcast. I would have never had a podcast if it hadn't been for model railroading. You would have never probably written a book if it wasn't for model railroading.
That's true. Yeah.
you know,
or model railroading or rail fanning. I mean, there's certainly when I say the hobby, I kind of blend the two. I know that a lot of people think that they're two different hobbies, and they are, except that they offer a lot of back and forth together too. So to me, I roll them together.
Absolutely.
As,
they're both
the proverbial hobby.
But occasionally you will find a rail fan that insists that he has no interest in model railroading, but there's not a model railroader on the planet that isn't interested in full-size railroading.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're modeling railroading. So, I mean, I think that's I hope that's the truth. And if there's a model railroader out there that doesn't know how or why to watch trains, drop us a note. I believe that the email address is modlerslife@gmail.com.
That's modelers with one L, like Abelese, not two L's like Lionel.
So if you need any suggestions or guidance on how to get in touch with the station inn or how to watch trains, what to do, given that this is a podcast for the whole world to hear, guys, it's all out there. Ladies, it's right around the corner, and it's fascinating, and it's vibrant, and it's critical to our economy, and it's related to the entire history of Western civilization. It's fascinating, and it's right there. None of this stuff requires special permission to go out and watch a train go by.
Yeah, one of the things I like to do on the podcast is talk about what I don't know. And I mean, for that whole weekend, we probably saw, the time I was there, I probably saw 50 trains in one form or another. I couldn't tell you one locomotive from another, unless it's a Jeep 7 or an RS1 or an F unit, from the first generation diesel, a Jeep 35. Once it gets into the more modern stuff, anything built after 1990, I couldn't tell you one from another. And I don't need to know what the locomotives are to sit on the porch at the station inn and let that when we were interviewing, I was interviewing you, and a train went by, we both held our microphones out because it was going up the 1%, 1.5% grade eastbound, 3 locomotives pulling a long train, and the sound was just it was the coolest thing you could hear all day.
Yeah, it was a deafening, amazing sound. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you don't need to be an expert in any part of it to enjoy this hobby.
Correct. There's so many facets. I mean, tomorrow at work, I'm actually going to give a tour to 24 summer interns who are finishing up their summer before they go back to college.
Oh, yeah?
Of the interior of Newark Penn Station. So, I'll take down one of my history books that has a bunch of pictures of it under construction. And, these are all, kids in their teens and 20s that may not know anything about railroads. But the company allows tours. They encourage the kids to go out and see things and try things. So I'm going to talk to a bunch of new faces tomorrow about NJ Transit and its stations and its history. And, we can do that because it's there. Newark Penn Station, anybody can walk through Newark Penn Station and look at the history. Like, all of this is right in front of us. So even on your hardest day, even on your most challenging, most depressing day, there's things to do. There's ways to see something new and be excited. Yeah. And you don't always feel up to it. I understand that. I don't either. None of us do. Everybody goes through that, but it doesn't change the fact that the opportunity is there for you to take advantage of.
That'd be right up your alley, showing interns.
Oh man, it's funny. My wife, who's an introvert, was like, "Oh my God, I would dread that for weeks," and I'm like, "That is the easiest part of my day tomorrow."
Yeah,
it's giving a tour to younger people for Newark Penn Station. I've got a bunch of much harder things to worry about tomorrow, and this will be my break.
All right, so let me ask you this question. I mean, now that you've had the book published, you did the Facebook thing. I mean, it seems to fit right into your personality. The way I describe you, I think the best way to describe you, and the way I describe you to people that don't know you, I say, Dave is a guy that loves to talk. He loves to talk. He has lots of, it's not opinions. He just likes to he likes to share his life with people. But the best part is, then when he stops, he wants to know what you've got to say. And that's the difference between somebody that's a blowhard and somebody that's actually a caring individual. You love to show people stuff. It's like I actually thought I was going to take a couple of weeks off from recording podcasts. And it's like, nah, oh yeah, I wanted to talk to Chris Palmieri about home shops. And oh yeah, Lauren James and Bernard, they were at St. Louis RPM. I should do one with them. It'd be fun to, because it's like I described to people. I want to talk to these people anyways, and the podcast gives me a reason. And it's like it's right in your wheelhouses. But you always are interested in what people you're interested in. You are legitimately interested in people's opinions. You may not necessarily agree, but you are generally interested in what people have to say, which is what is the special part of the Dave Abelese experience.
Well, those are humbling things to hear, and there's a lot of my dad in what you just said. My dad loved people, and it didn't matter what their background was or what they were doing. He loved people. He loved to talk to people. He also was someone that was he wanted people to be accountable to their beliefs, to their their to trying to do something for somebody else. Avoiding selfishness, avoiding, gluttony but not in a totalitarian way. My dad can make friends with anybody. And when I spent some time in China in 2005, my dad had been in the Peace Corps, so he'd been in Asia before, but it was my first time going to China. And Dad just struck up conversations with random people on the street.
Oh, that's the best. That's the best.
Like random people in train stations that knew 20 words of English. And they'd call a school kid over because the school kids were learning English and knew 100 words or 200 words. And the little kid would translate, and my dad would have a conversation with a random woman selling fish on the corner or a random guy fixing a shoe in a shop. My dad could make friends with anybody. And I believe I share that fascination of people and of what people have to offer. It's easy to get distracted these days about all the problems you see on the news and all the horror stories and the fear mongering and the world's ending and national debt and these terrible immigrants and global warming and energy. It's always a crisis. It's always an end of the world, right? And meanwhile, my dad's talking to somebody on the corner.
Yeah.
Because to him, it was about people. And I'm indebted to him and to my mom with her ability to be just a great listener. My mom, that's why I don't think I'm a great listener. It's nice to hear that, but I have a lot to learn, I think, there too, because my mom was I think there was 8 people that called my mom their best friend.
You and I wouldn't be having these conversations if you weren't a listener. Yes, you like to talk, but you are a listener. I always feel like if I got something to say, you're interested in hearing it. And one of the greatest, talking about your dad and talking to people, one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life. I was like I learned so much in that first 12 months of having cancer. That was like, packing a lifetime's worth of experience into 12 months.
And maybe more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was sitting there one day in the blood lab. And the problem with that hospital was everywhere you go, and the reason I try to raise money for the psychosocial oncology clinic is everywhere you go in that hospital, people have fear in their eyes. Mm-hmm. Everywhere you go, except for the people that work there, all the patients have fear in their eyes. Their family members that are with them have fear in their eyes. They're all terrified. And I was in the blood lab one day, and you could see people. I would look for people, I'd be sitting there and you could see people with their eyes. Some people were just desperate to have somebody say something to them. And, so you'd be looking there, you'd sit around, you'd be sitting there and you'd look at the people around you and you'd catch somebody who would make eye contact with you. And you'd simply say something like, "What are you in for?" And you'd try to make a joke for them and blah, blah, blah. And one day, somehow I was on a roll. I had the room. I was working the room. And this woman says to me, she was a patient. She says, "I wish you were here every day. You have just brightened this room up 100%. And I'm like, I'm just sitting there being me. And it's like, it was one of the nicest things anybody ever said to me, because there was all these people that were terrified of what was happening to them.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's an opportunity. And now that's one of the great things I think about what you've done with the podcast too. Like, there you go. Maybe you and I weren't supposed to meet until after you'd had cancer, until after my mom had passed away from cancer. Like, maybe we weren't supposed to, maybe I was not supposed to be exposed to, Jerry Diedzik and Rich Wisniewski and the greater New Jersey operating crowd early, because I would have been too exuberant. I would have burned myself out or burned them out, so I'd get excluded. Maybe everything is just the way that it's supposed to be. But what you've done with the podcast is you have a newfound awareness of the struggle. Like, because, and it's not that you didn't know about cancer before that, but it's different when it hits you in the face. It's a different, when it affects your world personally, you may think you could understand it, but it's a whole different perspective when it's you or someone right next to you. It's I'll bet you it's akin, to all the veterans out there who have been through actual conflict and have seen their comrades suffer or pass away. I mean, there's nothing that can prepare you for that. Nothing. And I have so much respect for veterans and for frontline, first responders, firemen, police officers, military police, paramedics, people that forest fire people, like, in Canada and the United States, that's a big deal lately. Like, people that go into urban search and rescue when there's a building collapse. I mean, these people run towards the problem, not away from it.
Yeah.
And what you did with cancer, Lionel, was you ran towards the problem because you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Right? But it still takes courage to do that, in my opinion.
But I think what all our fireside chats have done is we've realized, I think I've realized through a lot of the fireside chats, and I like talking, now I realize I like talking to people, other individuals having the same kind of thing. It's this hobby is if you have this hobby in your back pocket, it's a huge asset to your life.
That is a fact. I would be a different person, a much less happy person.
Yeah. If
I didn't have railroads.
Yeah. Like for me, it's model railroading, but I mean, it's the same thing like we talked about. But I think what none of us realize is having this hobby in your back pocket is something that you cannot explain to. It's a tool in your arsenal of getting through life. It's being excited about the next car you're going to, like, even when things aren't going your way. Like I've said 1,000 times, there's something about this hobby that once it gets into your blood, you cannot get it out. It's always there. And
thank goodness for that.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness for that. But it's like it's, I'm sure there's been many instances, and like you say, like you're a very busy guy with 3 kids, and you're there. It's like having puppy dogs. It's like, we've got a new puppy, and it's, this is the lost summer for me, because all of a sudden it came and went, and I suddenly realized it's because this dog, you got 3 kids. It's like having 3 puppies, and they're always going, and you're trying. But you always have that chance to sit down, go down and work on the turbo train. I'm sure that gave you all kinds of thrills over the last few weeks of, when you got a quiet moment, you'd go work on the turbo train.
Yeah, but it was months, Lionel, because the freaking air conditioner leaked. And that was a gigantic repair project. And it's summertime, so there's a million things going on. But all kidding aside, absolutely. Like, masking it's the first time I've ever weathered an entire train by itself. So I had to mask every window, every light, and then you batch weather it. You do all 5 or 6 pieces at the same time. So it was, and that's, then there's the programming, and it was a project. This was like a 3 or 4 week project, not counting the 2 weeks putting the house together after the flood. So, but now I look at it. I'm sitting down here next to the OC, look across the aisle, and there's the turbo train. And my goodness, it looks like 1994. It's dirty. It's missing the Amtrak lettering on one of the flanks, like that particular power car did. And I could find that photograph because it's on the internet. Like, what an and I know that I can take microsol and put it on a paper towel and lay it over the lettering on a locomotive or anything. And after 15 minutes, the lettering comes up like a decal, and suddenly you have a blank slate to renumber or remove lettering. Like, these are all things I've learned because of Rare Model Craftsman, because of Model Railroader, because of A Mother's Life, right? Because of the internet. Like, there's so many avenues to learn to perfect the art of model railroading, And now that there's this Center for Railroad Photography as art, I'm going to argue that at some point there should probably be a Center for Model Railroading as art.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that's an absolute
someday.
That's an absolute
someday.
must. I mean, that's and I think long after I'm gone and while you're still around, you're going to be sitting around there one day and go, Lionel was right. This thing just exploded, and it's nothing like it was when I was 20 years old. Because it's nothing like it was when I was 20 years old,
Honestly, it's nothing like it was when I was 20 years old.
Yeah.
It's night and day. It's night and day. 1997, Bachmann Spectrum had just come out, right?
Yeah. How many people are... I got the itch to build a small switching layout just so I can buy a couple of those GE 44 tonners from Rapido. Dude. From Rapido Trains.
Rapido Trains, your fast track to model railroading fun.
If it's N, if it's HO, the fast track is Rapido.
Oh my God, those 44 tonners are hot. But what we need is for them to do it in Skinny Atlas Shortline. Skinny Atlas Shortline number 6 needs to be one of the Rapido 44 tonners.
Yeah.
Because it ended up all over the country. It ended up on a couple different railroads, both before and after that. So it's an engine that made some rounds. But boy, would that be cool! Because I don't know how I'm going to decal it.
Why can't you just get the decals and put it on, or decals?
Decals. That's I have some that were printed for me by a guy probably 10 years ago, and of course now they're 10 years old, so there's that problem. But they're also from a dot matrix printer or, early color jet printer. So when you look at them compared to modern decals and modern letter and with modern photography, you're going to see it's not going to look sharp. It's just not going to look sharp. So I've got a Bachmann Spectrum undecorated DCC and sound equipped 44 tonner here. But when Rapido announced theirs, it's like, well, I'm not going to use this one. Like, now, if I'm going to do it, I have to do it right. And then I saw, somebody was doing a custom run already of these. They haven't even been released yet.
Yeah.
And somebody's already got 3 custom paint jobs. Was it Otter Valley? One of these guys is doing custom paint jobs already.
Really?
Of the 44 tonner. It was just on Facebook a couple of days ago. And I thought to myself, well, darn it, I got to find a way to get Skinny Atlas Shortline on somebody's private run. Maybe the OC should sponsor it.
There you go.
I don't even know what that would look like.
Well, just send one to just a custom painter. That was an interesting discussion I had with Dan Darnell from Rapido Trains.
Rapido Trains? Your fast track to model railroading fun.
Rapido Trains, your fast track to model railroading fun.
Just buy a couple of them and get somebody to custom paint them. But anyways, I was having this discussion with Dan Darnell, And he was saying it's a dying art, custom painting of model railroad stuff, and he's right.
Because there's so much good stuff. Custom painting, I still enjoy it, and I do it from time to time. But the reason why weathering has reached a new level of art is because you don't have to worry about custom painting as much, because most of the stuff is going to be, either has been or will be available from a commercial manufacturer.
Yeah, one of the most amazing things to me is the dying out of undecorated equipment, and yet there was a time when prototype or freelance prototype railroads was the way to go, and you needed undecorated equipment just for that.
Tony Custer talked about that at length on his podcasts with us, and the bottom line is that he couldn't get nickel plate equipment. So he came up with the Allegheny Midland, because that way he could at least model, equipment that he liked, say that it was linked to the nickel plate road, which is the road he grew up with in Indiana, and go from there. And so the whole hobby has shifted largely in part to the masterful manufacturing that we see going on right now. It's just exciting. It's great. And it's a pleasure to be here. And again, to everybody here on the free channel, it's a pleasure to spend an evening with you at one of our fireside chats, and hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, we can do it again on the free channel, but we'll go back to Patreon, right? Because Patreon channel is more like this. It's a lot of soul searching. It's a lot of talking. We talk model railroading. The whole thing is held together. The glue of the podcast is model railroading. But on the Patreon channel, we like to dive a little deeper into who the people are, and thankful for your push and your guidance. The Onondaga Cutoff Patreon channel, patreon.com/Onondaga Cutoff. That's the OC deep dive. If you want to see the back scenes of how we do things on the Onondaga Cutoff, how we build the Facebook sessions, how I weather things, how I do scenery, all of that, and a little bit of my philosophical tangents. all of that is there on the Patreon channel. Absolutely. It's an investment in the community of the OC. And that's the point of, like I constantly beat on you to keep that Patreon channel going, because 100 years from now, all those videos you're making are going to be just this huge library of stuff that's looked back over the years. And, it's going to be, it's something you got to keep doing, because
I plan on it. It's, look, I'm doing the stuff down here anyway, and it's fun. It's fun to show people how to do it, and it's creating a library of stuff that I own and that I can take anywhere. Someday if there's some sort of situation where that could be part of a bigger project or a different media release under a different name, a different brand. Hey, that's great, but at least it exists, and driving to do it is a great reason to keep creating it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we got to stop now.
All right.
All right, so we talked about our email address, which is modelerslife@gmail.com. That's modelers with one L like Abel's, not two L's like Lionel. And,
there you go.
And if you, Dave, have you ever wanted a T-shirt with a hot dog on it?
I have.
Well, if you go to our website, modelerslife.com, you'll see that the email address, if you scroll down a little bit, there's a, I'm all screwed up. There's a picture of the moderately agitated male boy in a particularly agitated state, and you can click on that, and you don't even need to know the email address. But also, if you go to MidwestModelRailroad.com, and their URL is MidwestModelRR.com. I'm rushing now. I always notice that when I start to rush, I don't do very well at saying what I want to say. And you can't rush, you can't, if you're working with the computer and you're trying to do something, you start rushing, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. Anytime you rush, you're taking a big risk.
Yeah.
And if you're a master, maybe you get away with it.
Yeah.
But not every time.
No. So anyway, yeah, you go to Midwest Model Railroad. Their URL is MidwestModelRR.com. You scroll across the navigation bar to other. And you click on the drop-down menu, and there the AML shop is there. There's a wonderland of AML merchandise, hats, hoodies, mugs, T-shirts, whatever you could possibly need. And in there, you'll find a T-shirt with a hot dog on it. So you
Oh,
absolutely.
there you go.
Oh, you know what? I was giving Ralph. I wanted, that was a great idea I have for a podcast too, and Rich will remember. But I was talking to Rich and Ralph, and were you in that conversation where these guys had operated on every layout on the planet?
Yeah, those two guys are incredible. I would be happy to be part of that podcast. But those guys, they've really been part of the operation side of this thing for decades.
And there was a third person. Who was the third person they talked about that we knew? That's a mutual. Was it? I don't know. There's a third person. But anyways, what a great podcast that would be, because those two guys have operated on everything.
They've been a lot of places. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it would be, and they were telling stories about Howard Worthwine, and I mean Ralph's story alone is fascinating, because as a kid he started basically operating at Howard Worthwine's, which opened the door for him to everything, and he's operated
Correct.
everywhere.
He's operated a lot of places. Not as much out west. He hasn't traveled as much out of the Northeast, but if Northeastern layouts, yeah. And the long tenure, the arc of tenure that he's got.
Oh my God, yeah.
And Ralph is a genuine, heart on his sleeve kind of guy. Just he's a real pleasure to spend time with, and he's a regular here on the Onondaga Cutoff too. He's a very good friend. So that would be a lot of fun.
Oh, it would be a great podcast. And a huge shout out to Rich at the Crescent Weekend. Thanks, Rich, for helping me get up to the ledge. Rich was very concerned, and it's an incredibly steep climb to get up to we end up on the west side of the horseshoe curve, and it's very, very cool. But you got to go up this incredible. Well, you got to go up the side of a mountain really to get there.
That's it.
And Rich was. Me and Rich and his son Andrew got there first, and he was terribly concerned. And I said, Rich, I'll make it. You just you got to give me a chance to. I'll make it, buddy. And he was terribly concerned. But anyways, a huge shout out to Rich for had a great weekend with him. And what else? Oh yeah, and so. If you like this podcast on the free channel and you like listening to Dave and all that, and you'd like to hear more from Dave and other people, every Monday is free with the podcast. But every Tuesday, we have a Patreon channel, and for just a few cents a day, you get to hear twice as much podcasting every month. And like I say, if you really like the deep dive kind of stuff and you just don't know what you're going to. Some of it's funny, some of it's more thoughtful, but it's interesting stuff. That's where you want to go. And there's a link on our website for that as well. And there's also a link to Dave's Patreon channel right there on the website as well. All you got to do is click on the button, the picture of him and I, and boom, you're at Dave's Patreon channel.
Exciting times. Exciting times,
God.
My friend. It really is.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So remember, a Modeler's Life podcast is considered marginally adequate by 6 out of 10
people that will weather a Rapido turbo train.
And now it's time for the New Jersey Transit Elevator Escalator Report. Take it away, Dave.
Good morning, everybody. Today, number one here on the list is Newark Penn Station number 14. That one needs a step chain adjustment. They got to adjust the lower carriage assembly. Newark Penn Station number 8 is back in service. Secaucus 16 was out overnight for a skirt panel reset, but he's back in service too. Somerville eastbound is still out for its DCA test. We had a sump pump problem, so they should be back on that later this week. And Absecon, the lone elevator there, was out overnight. Somebody held the doors open too long, and it's back in service as of this morning.
It's another Lincoln Homer.
That's a mouthful.
Well, What else is new?
That was a good chat.